everyone to 10,000 Degrees Resume Refresh. I'm so happy to see 48 attendees in our room today. So again, thank you for taking the time. Welcome. Whether this is your first time that you're putting together a resume and really trying to figure it out, or you already have a really strong draft and you just want to keep improving it, you are in the right place today. So let me go over the flow of the day so you know what to expect. We're going to end at about 6 today, so just a 1-hour webinar. We are doing introductions right now. I'll introduce my co-host in just a moment. And then after that, we'll have about maybe 10 minutes where my co-host and I are going to go over best practices for resumes. So like I said, take notes. And then we will feature 2 sample resumes. These are real resumes from 10,000 Degrees students. I have changed their names to protect their identity, and I do have their consent. But we'll be walking you through our comments, recommendations, and feedback on these 2 resumes. After that, we will open it up to general questions for the last 10 minutes. If there's anything else that is on your mind and that we can help you with. Please feel free to use the Q&A button to ask any questions throughout the event. We're happy to answer them. And that's our event for tonight. So with that, we are going to get started. If you have any, tech problems, if you're having problems with the chat, anything at all, Han Nong will be helping with all tech issues. So feel free to message her in the chat or find her and she can help you. And next, my other co-host, Sogol Nance, is here today. She is joining us from IEQ Capital. She's the Director of People Operations, and I'm going to turn it over to her for the rest of her intro. Thank you so much for being here tonight, Sogol. Take it away.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks so much. I'm really excited to be here. So as Gwen mentioned, I am the Director of People at IEQ Capital, and I've been there with the main team for about 5 years now. What Director of People means is basically anything and everything people related I'm handling, which is another way of saying human resources. And so what that means is I'm working on the training and development of our new hires. I'm working on the organizational development of the company. So anytime there are maybe org changes, I'm helping figure out who might report to whom. So figuring out different reporting lines. I'm helping management coach our more senior team members. I maintain the culture. So in terms of, team events, team trips, swag that we might get, there's a whole strategy behind all of that. And lastly, and most importantly, I think for today, the main thing that I am in charge of is recruiting for IEQ Capital. So any position that we're hiring for, it all goes through me. But to take a big step back, I was born and raised in Norman, Oklahoma, very far away from California. I went to the University of Oklahoma out there, and I majored in business marketing. My whole background, I always thought I would go into the fashion industry. That was a big dream of mine. And after a lot of hard work, lots of internships in Oklahoma, which is not a fashion capital, I landed a job in New York City. So I went out there, worked in a magazine for about a year. It was really tough. The industry was not what I had expected. And, just getting my first full-time position was just really different. And I realized it wasn't where I wanted to be. I didn't like how it changed my personality. New York was just also very intense. And at the time, my then boyfriend, now husband, was being recruited by companies out in California, and we took a risk and made the move out to the Bay Area. I actually thought the Bay Area was like LA, where it would be, very deserty, dry heat, lots of beaches. And I didn't do my research before I moved out here, and I didn't realize we'd have weather, like this almost, a majority of the year. So that was a big wake-up call for me. Once we moved, I actually had a very, very hard time finding a job. My resume was very fashion heavy, and I thought I could easily find a job in tech, and marketing. But after, I think it was 6 months to a year, I was going through the interview process, ramping up my resume, connecting with as many people as I could. And it took me that year to really land that job, which happened to be, the company that I'm working at today. And I have slowly worked my way up in that company, where I started out as an administrative assistant, worked with, various different team members, and, have worked my way up to the head of human resources. So long background, but I want to say the premise of that and the biggest takeaway is you may think you have one path in life that you're trying to go down, but know that things are going to change, and it's going to be hard, but hop on any opportunity you can, because you never know where it's going to take you. So me thinking I was going to be in fashion, now all of a sudden I'm in finance, and I'm so happy. I never would have thought that back in the day. So today I'm here to really give you guys a glimpse into the other side, what it's like to be a recruiter. Ask me anything and everything you want today, from anything as to what do you want to see in a resume? Should I write a cover letter? Should I write a thank you note? Whatever you want to do, please try to prick my brain. We'll try to answer any and all questions that we can. But I'm here to give you guys, those tips and tricks. I've been on both sides, and currently I'm on this side. So anything you need, just feel free to ask us. So Gwen, I'll pass it over to you.
All right, great. So let's go through some best practices. Some of you may have heard me talk about these before, but they're worth repeating. And so we'll feel free to chime in at any time. But first and foremost, especially for current students, I suggest one-page resume. One page, one side, okay?
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more.
Excellent. One page, one side. Also, formatting is incredibly important. And I used to be an English major in my undergrad, and so I get so obsessed with like the content and the grammar, and that's important too, don't get me wrong. But your overall formatting, you want it to look professional. You want all of the sections to be really clear. Work experience, education, skills, your contact information, all of that should be very, very apparent. Because remember, it's not just the hiring manager that's going to be looking at this. It's all kinds of people that have to review and look at this as it's passed on throughout that company or organization. So you want it to represent you the best. Make sure that formatting is spot on. And I'm talking about the details, y'all. Font should be consistent. Margins should be consistent. All of it. Get a template, play with it. Feel free to send it to me and we can, talk about that. Moving on.
One thing I'll add there, Gwen, is
Yes.
if I see a resume before even reading anything that's on it, if formatting is off, I will decline that interview and move on to the next one, just because it's your first impression. And so if somebody doesn't take a moment or 2 or 3 moments to put in that attention to detail, well, what does that show in their work ethic? Does that mean they're going to give a little bit of effort in the actual job? So no matter what's on paper and no matter how you might actually work, that's their first glimpse into what you may or may not do on the actual job. So can't emphasize that any more than that.
I'll share another tip and then I'm going to turn it over to Sogol because I'm so excited to hear more of your knowledge. But another recommendation that I have is to maybe have a few different versions of your resume if you're going for different roles. So if you're going for example, market, like let's say you're a business student, but you're interested in marketing and maybe also product development and maybe accounting. I'm making this up. But let's say, you're multifaceted and you're interested in all those things. I would make a version of your resume for each of those, really emphasizing and catering towards that specific industry. So if it's accounting, making sure that, you've worked with data and money, and basic accounting software, etc. Likewise for a marketing resume, making sure that you're demonstrating marketing and social media campaigns that you may have run, etc. So don't be afraid to have multifaceted interests and be interested in a few different careers, but also have the different versions so that you're not seeing a job and thinking, oh my gosh, I have to create this whole new resume for this job. Have them ready. And I'll close with that. And so we'll take it away with the rest of your
Yeah,
advice.
yeah, absolutely. Before I move on, I definitely want to add to that. Obviously, you guys are new in your careers. You're trying to figure out what industry you want to be in. You may or may not actually know exactly what you want to do. So applying to different industries is normal. Like Gwen mentioned, you don't want to have one resume for everything because it's not going to be the same. And for instance, whenever I was interviewing way back in the day, I was thinking about tech and I was thinking about some marketing firms. Obviously, tech and marketing are very different, and what marketing firms care about and what technology firms care about are very different. Now, my past experiences, although it wasn't specific to either, you can tailor your skills to be relevant. So for instance, if I'm trying to get a job at a tech firm and one of the skills that I have is working with different softwares in one of my previous companies, obviously software and understanding, how to use different systems is really important in tech. And so instead of saying proficient in Salesforce, I could beef that up a little bit for my tech resume to say proficient in Salesforce, utilize Salesforce to enhance the client relationship management process. And that's specific to tech. If it were a marketing firm, I may not highlight it as strongly, but obviously in marketing firms, you do use different technology systems. So I might say utilize Salesforce to organize various clients to know when to reach out to them. So you're doing the same things, it's just rewording what you've done to really highlight those different industries. Hopefully that makes sense. Sometimes it can be a little confusing, but as you kind of dive in there, hopefully you'll get that concept.
We have a few questions, but on that vein, I wanted to ask you one that I get all the time from students. So if they haven't had, let's say they're a freshman or a sophomore and they haven't had much professional experience yet, so maybe they haven't had an internship yet, but they're applying to internships and they want to convey some of these things like you're saying, but don't have that, what do you recommend?
It's a really good question, and that can be really hard. I think putting all of the job experience that you do have as a freshman or a sophomore, it's important, and you can still tailor your specific skills to those different industries. You have to draw parallels as closely as you can. But this is a case where a cover letter, I think, is very, very important because you can actually explain things in a cover letter more than you can your resume. So I think there are certain situations where cover letters make sense and sometimes when it doesn't. Specifically in this case that you mentioned, I would absolutely write a cover letter to say, why are you interested? How do your previous skills translate, and just engage a little bit more that way. That's also pertinent to individuals that you might have experience, but you're wanting to make a career shift into a different industry. So I've seen a lot of resumes, from engineers that want to make a shift into financial services. And if I just see their resume, I don't understand, why they want to do it. But if they tack on a cover letter to it and draw parallels to how their previous experience can relate and can help them in finance, and why they want to make this switch, I'm more compelled to say, oh, okay, let me interview this person. Let me see, what they have to offer. So that's something that I would suggest there.
All right, let's address a few of these questions before we dive into our
Sure.
resume examples. And one of them, kind of going off of what you were saying, so if we're using the same example of a student that doesn't have very much professional experience yet, or they're just a brand new student who they're just writing their resume now, what is the basic information or categories that you think are the most important for a current student applying for internships, or let's say like an older student who's starting to look for full-time work or and more advanced internships, let's say? But what are the categories that are absolutely needed?
Yeah, absolutely needed. I would say education is key. A lot of places, they want a specific degree, and they want to know that you've graduated or are working your way towards graduation. So education, I always say, put at the top, unless you are, a vice president that's, applying for a vice president position, then you can put it at the bottom, because at that point it doesn't really make sense. But for all of us, even for me today, if I were to get a new job, I would put education on there. I would say the next big thing is work experience. So hopefully you have some work experience to put on there, whether it's, working in retail, working in the restaurant business, working at your family's company, whatever it might be. Definitely put that on there, because that shows, that you have that work ethic, you have that desire to want to work. If for some reason you don't, that's okay. Put your volunteer experience on there. I think volunteer experience on there is good whether or not you have your work experience. But education, professional experience, and volunteer or extracurriculars is good things to put on there.
Awesome, thank you. Couple more questions before,
Sure.
thank you for all the questions,
Yeah.
y'all. Great.
Yeah. Thank you guys. Keep them coming.
Going back to cover letters, which you
Mhm.
were just talking about, and how to best utilize them. Um, there are different cover letters. I've seen them too. Some cover letters have like a bullet format. Some of them are just like a traditional cover letter. Likewise for resumes, are there certain formats or templates that are more appealing to recruiters?
That's a good question. I would say there's not a exact science to all of this. Something that I might prefer is going to be very different than what another recruiter prefers versus what another recruiter prefers. So in terms of, cover letters, me specifically, I'm in a more traditional industry. And so cover letters, I would like to see them a little bit more traditional, where it's, you have your few paragraphs, um, you are mentioning the recruiter's name and the date, and explaining what position you're applying for and why. But others, if if you're trying to get into the tech industry, they I don't think they even care about cover letters. But it depends on who you get. In terms of the resumes, I don't think there's one specific format that every recruiter looks for. As long as you can look at it and you can see the picture that the person is trying to paint for you, I think that is what's most important. Knowing, how to follow the story, like reading the person's name, and then your eye gets taken to, their first job, and then the eye gets taken to the next job and how long they were there. As long as it flows smoothly, that's really what recruiters tend to look for.
All right, great. And we just had a question pop up about the difference between a cover letter and a resume. So your resume we'll show a couple of examples, but it's really like a one-page summary that showcases your work experience, skill set, and education. The cover letter, I always talk about the cover letter as like the preview to the movie, which is you and like interviewing you. But the cover letter is really showcasing, I understand what the role needs, and these are the experiences that I have that complement the role. This is what I can offer. Maybe here's some additional information, like Sobol mentioned, that you might not see on my resume, as far as like my passions, or I don't know, other projects, or I'm transitioning, I want to try something different, whatever that might look like. So cover letter, a letter, introducing yourself, summarizing your resume. But again, it's all, think about it as the preview to the movie. I love that metaphor. And then the resume, that's like your, again, summary of skills, work experience, education, all of your information, etc. Anything to add, Sobol?
No, I think that was perfectly written. I would say, obviously, it's you're going to be applying to many positions, and it can be very clear if you're taking the same cover letter and blasting it out to, all different places, and the only thing you're taking out and editing is the name of the company and the role. So make sure that your cover letter specifically states why you're going to be good at this role. So your cover letter is going to constantly be changing. I think it's much more dynamic than your resume, where your resume you can have 3 or 4 different versions that you can send out here and there, but your cover letter, it's going to change depending on every single company you may or may not actually apply for.
All right, great. Let's see. Look at these other questions here. I want to take care of those questions at the end. I want to dive into, because I think we're going to address some of these questions as we're going through our resume examples. So I'm not ignoring you. We will get to all of these questions. If not during the review, then at the end with the Q&A. But let's dig into that now. And let me get our first example up. All right, can everyone see that? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so I will go over this one. All right, so this is, again, Sandra Cisneros, not a real student, but this is a real student resume. Sandra Cisneros is one of my favorite writers, by the way. Some of you in the room might know her. Anyway, let's go through this. All right, I want to look at this as a whole. I'm seeing that it's a little bit over a page, so it may have been, me downloading it. But again, we want to stick to a page, so let's condense this a little bit. I'd like to see a little bit better formatting here, and again, so we'll chime in anytime, but I'd love to see sections that are more clearly defined, and maybe just a little bit more stylized, just to stick out of the crowd. Remember, a lot of these roles that you're going to be applying for, there's like tons and tons of students, so I just feel like it could use a little bit more pizzazz. I like that education is on the top. I do advise that your most recent educational experience should be on top. So when I look at this, I'm thinking, oh, are they at Roseland Prep now? Right? And obviously not. And this question comes up a lot, like, should I still include my high school? And my answer to that is, if you're currently in high school, yes. If you're in college, what hiring managers and recruiters are going to care about is where you're going to college and what you're majoring in and when you're going to graduate. So I feel like you could erase, you could delete your high school experience if you wanted to, because I don't think they're going to ask about that. Make sure that Sacramento State is front and center. I would add the year that you're going to graduate. or expected date of, or estimated date of graduation. That way, a recruiter or a hiring manager knows that, because for some internships, they're very specific. They only want juniors, they only want sophomores, and so forth. So I would add that.
Exactly. I think that'll also, as we saw, it's 2 pages. So if you take out that one line, that's going to start letting everything kind of creep up a little bit so that it can start to fit in one page. But yeah, looking at this, to go back just a little bit, as you mentioned, yeah, the formatting, I don't really know where to look after education. And it's just kind of jumbled right there. So definitely keeping the formatting, I think, would be important.
Along in the veins of formatting, I love bullet points, y'all. I'm all about bullet points on the resume, because it is such an easy way for a hiring manager to really quickly look through. And obviously they'll take a detailed read maybe later, but to really be able to understand your work experience story and your skills. So again, bullet points help with that. When you don't have bullet points, I feel like things get kind of lost in the document. It just looks like a bunch of like paragraphs here, right? So bullet points would be great. You guys know I love my active verbs. I'm going to provide a bunch of electronic resources here at the end for you all to utilize, but active verbs are a great way to start a bullet point. Coordinating, blah, 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 managing, trained, whatever that looks like for you. And there's that, I see some of that here. I also recommend like 3 to 5 bullet points per work experience. And again, it's kind of hard to see here because it looks like a paragraph. But again, you really want to showcase your skills and experience. Sometimes I see students talking about like the company or the organization that they worked for, like within the bullet points. You save that for the interview. Really hone in on what you did. Why, how, with whom, and any metrics as well. That's another thing that I recommend for bullet points. Add some metrics. How much in sales per day? How many customers do you estimate per day? How many hours did you put into that project, etc.
The other thing I would add to that is, I 100% agree with all of those. I think that's a big thing that's very consistent between all recruiters, is they like seeing those metrics. When you put those metrics on there though, or when you put any specific bullet point on your resume, be ready to speak to those. Know exactly what you have written down on there, because if a recruiter is having an initial phone call with you and says, oh, I see you boosted sales by 150%. Well, can you tell me how you know that and how did you do that? And you have to be ready to say all of that, and you don't want to fumble and say, oh, I just assume it was 150% and I can't really remember what I did. Have your answers ready, and that'll really help you also figure out what you should put on your resume.
Thank you. Yes, 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 yes. Let's see. I think that's all I have for this one. I am going to stop sharing because I know there's a million questions. So I'm going to stop sharing for now. All right. And let me check in on the current questions that we have. Anything else to add on to that example before we address some of these questions?
No, I think you covered all of that exactly how I would. One thing I was going to add to that was, the individual had the titles of all of her previous experiences, but she didn't put where she actually worked. So that's something that you're going to want to put in there too, is not only what your title was, but where you worked and what company, because that's very, very relevant as well.
We have a whole bunch of questions, so let's answer some and then we'll do the example after that.
Sounds good.
And again, I'm trying to get to all of these, y'all. You guys have so many good questions. All right. Would you recommend putting a link or a QR code to your LinkedIn on your resume? I've seen some pros and cons about this.
I really enjoy it. And I like it a lot, not just so that I can see somebody's picture. That's kind of secondary. What I like to see is consistency between the LinkedIn profile and the resume. If for some reason I go to your LinkedIn profile and you actually have different jobs listed on your LinkedIn profile than what you do in your resume, I'm all of a sudden going to be very skeptical and be curious as to why these are different. And so that's mainly the reason why. A lot of times you'd be surprised at what you see on this side of the equation. But I want to see that consistency and make sure the dates match up, are it it points to a lot of things. It points to attention to detail, it points to honesty. And I just want to draw some, quick conclusions just by seeing that. But I really like it. I
Do
don't know,
you,
what do you think? Do you like it?
I think my only concern is just making sure that it doesn't, I know that a lot of resumes are, like scanned, and that there are different technology is used when there's a high volume of resumes. I'll put it that way.
Mhm.
And so sometimes I get concerned if, there's images or if there's different formatting that it doesn't come through on the employer's end. But if that's not a concern, then I say go for it. And I've been seeing them more and more.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay. Another question that we had is, how long is a good length for a cover letter? And what I would recommend is no more than a page. And I guess that's just my answer in general. Resume, one-sided, one page. Cover letter, one-sided, no more than one page.
Exactly. Exactly. The only time, just so you guys are aware, I've seen two-page resumes is individuals with maybe 20 years of experience. Even individuals with 20 years of experience, they get their resume down to one page. It's just clean, it's professional. And again, you can speak to your experience. So one page on all of it.
And you want that one page to be the most relevant experience. Again, I know that I already talked about this, but it needs to be catered to that specific job or that sector, right? All right, moving on. How much detail should you give describing each job you've had? Again, I recommend 3 to 5 bullet points for the resume, and really focusing on skills, whether they're technical, um, any kinds of skills, management, if you've trained anyone before, um, any type of work experience, really. Would you like to elaborate on that, Sobel, as far as
Yeah, and I think you're going down the right path there. And this is again where, you're going to have to, your resume is going to be dynamic a little bit, where depending on which position you're applying for, you're going to have to change change what's on there and how many bullets might be in there for specific roles. So for instance, let's take the marketing example one more time. So say you have 3 previous um, work experiences. Um, Say your first job wasn't that relevant, but there might be some things that are parallel to this new job that you're interviewing for. Then maybe just put 3 bullet points. Save yourself a little bit of space. If your next position is a little bit more relevant, maybe have maybe 3 or 4 in there. Again, the most pertinent ones that are relevant to your current job, and whichever role that you had previously is most similar to the position that you're interviewing for, spend more time on that and have 4 or 5 bullets that try to pull some links as much as possible. So it doesn't matter which one it is, but as long as it's relevant to what you're trying to apply for, I think that's the most important thing there.
great? And I see a question in the chat. Again, I will get to all of them. But about if work experience should be in chronological order. And yes, it should. Your most recent job description should be right on top. So, again, contact information and objective if you want one, education, that's my preference, and then your work experience where you're currently at is what I recommend, and then chronological from there.
Exactly. Again, it's the recruiters reading from the top down, not the bottom up, and they want to see what's the most recent thing that you have done, and does that tie to what position you are applying for right now. And so having the most relevant up top, even if your most, say you took a gap in working for 2 years, if that's your most recent work experience, put that one at the very top. It tells the story very, very clearly.
And one last question that we'll answer, and then we'll get to our next example, but is about thank you notes. What would be efficient? What are efficient ways to write a thank you note to an interviewer? And I'm gonna also fill in a little bit here. Is email okay? Is, like a 1 paragraph quick thank you okay? What's your take?
So my take on this is a thank you note can make or break the interview process for you. So um, I feel like everybody's kind of gone away from this more traditional interview process where you had to send a handwritten thank you note to anybody that you interviewed with. I think it's started to kind of die down with certain industries, and even now being in financial services, although we're kind of a newer financial services firm, that's kind of dying. But I will say, when I do get thank you notes, and they are good thank you notes, it does make somebody stand out. But at the same time, if I get thank you notes, it could also eliminate somebody from the process, although we may have liked them. And I know that might sound crazy, but if you're going to do it, you got to do it right. And so what that means is, no spelling errors. Make sure you get the person's name right. A lot of people get that wrong. It's very interesting, or they spell the name wrong. And you don't want to just say thank you so much for your time. I enjoyed speaking with you and learning about the role. That's very generic. Anybody can say that. But if you can relate back to certain things that we talked about, certain things that stood out to you that you and I might have spoken about, that's always great. It shows me that you went the extra effort to really write that thank you note. But again, if there are typos in there, if it's very generic and you just kind of threw it out there, I might say, wow, I don't know, they didn't put that much effort into it and they still sent this. But in terms of method, I think email is totally fine. In my 5 years of experience, I've had 3 people send me overnight thank you notes. And, my first reaction is, oh, that's so nice. They really didn't need to do that, but that's really nice. But, it didn't give them the job, it just said, oh, this person stood out in my mind a little bit more, which sometimes can be helpful, sometimes not. But if I would just be very careful when you send those thank you notes.
Just to add quickly, I always recommend to you all to take notes while you're interviewing, right? And you can always say to your interviewer, I'm just going to jot down a few notes while we're talking so that they know, but you can reference those notes when you write your thank you note, because these folks are going to tell you a lot of information about the role that may not be, in the job description because it's more details. Reference those. This really interested me about the role. When you mentioned XYZ, that reminded me of this other experience, whatever. But find a couple points from your interview that you want to mention and highlight. I recommend that too. Have some substance to it and refer to your notes, because to me, if I was a hiring manager, I'd be like, wow, they're really thoughtful. They were really present during the interview and were really listening to what this role entails. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. If people don't take notes in interviews, that actually seems odd at this point, where when candidates come in, they don't have a pad and paper, they're not jotting down notes. My team and I, always think to ourselves, how are they going to remember, the 5 or 6 different people they met with that day? Do they not have questions they want to write down? Like, nobody has that great of a memory. So it's actually weird to not take notes. At the same time, you can go very extreme. Don't be the person that has their head down and is just taking notes the entire time and not looking up. We've had that happen quite a bit. So it's a very, happy medium between the two, but it's always great to have notepad and paper, interview process, or when you even get the job, have a notepad and paper. It's always important to have.
Yes, yes, and yes. There are more questions that we have. We'll get to those at the end. And like I said, some of those we might take care of also in our next review. So I'm going to share my screen, and Sobel, you're up. Give me one moment here.
Okay, Carlos Santana. Every time I hear this name, I think of all the music that he plays. I love it. So I might be jamming a little bit while I talk through this one. So Carlos Santana, if you kind of scroll down a little bit, you will see that he actually has 2 pages. Again, very big no. Just always make it 1 page. Second thing I would say here is, so interesting. You can actually see his full name on Gwen's computer, but on my screen, how I opened it up, half of his name is cut off. So this is a really good example. Depending on different softwares that individuals might open your resume on, it could look different to them. And so what I suggest doing is always saving your resume as a PDF and opening it on Google Chrome, opening it on Internet Explorer, Safari, asking a friend to open it on their computer, and just make sure that the formatting looks good. Because again, you never know what it's going to look like, and you don't want to get tossed out for a silly formatting issue like that. Second thing I would say, things aren't really aligned. Carlos Santana isn't aligned with his address at the very top. So you want to make sure, all of that is straight. In terms of the objective, it's really up to the candidate whether or not they want to put an objective up there. I see great objectives on there sometimes. Sometimes I see very mediocre objectives. But again, if that's something you're going to put on there, do it right. And so for this one in particular, there are some misuse of words. So I would say where he says, and personal skills in customer service, I would say that's actually supposed to say interpersonal skills. And then at the very end, in the world of finances, I think he actually means the world of finance. So make sure you're looking for typos, make sure you're using the right grammatical syntax and things like that. That's very important.
Really quick, if you're going to use an objective, it has to be specific to the role. So change it if you're using the same resume, I would recommend changing it every time. Or like I said, make a few different versions, but the objective needs to match with the role.
It does. And don't forget to update that, because again, I have seen resumes. I'm in the financial services industry. I get a very similar resume to this, and it says the world of venture capital or the world of engineering. And it's like, well, they didn't pay attention. They gave me the wrong resume. And so I move on to the next one. Very important to do that. Moving on to skills. Skills, I would actually move to the bottom if you're going to put skills on there. I don't always think skills is really relevant unless you are going for a technical role. If you are going, a technical role where you need skills in Salesforce, engineering, writing HTML, doing Tableau, those are really good skills to have. But put those down at the bottom. They'll see that eventually. But if they're general skills like, prioritization or time management, it's not going to make or break your resume, but I would still move that to the bottom there. But also, if you are going to put it in there, make sure that the font's the same. There's a lot of different fonts going on, lots of different spacing. It's a little bit smoother of a story than the previous one that we saw because it's formatted a little bit better, but still a lot of things that we'll go through that I'll nitpick here. So next being the professional experience. So this is where I get lost a little bit, but I can see that the work experience is in chunks. You always want the date over to the right because it's secondary. We don't need to know what dates you worked at this, whatever role this might be. We want to see that later. What we really want to know is what company were you working at and what your role was. So I would switch those, change the orders. And then I think it's great that they have 3 bullet points, but it doesn't tell me what they did. It's not telling me what they did. I'm not really sure what it's telling me here. So as an inventory manager and a shift leader at Subway, there's problem solving skills and they learned to communicate with different cohorts. But I feel like as an inventory manager at Subway, you're probably in charge of figuring out what produce you need to buy and how much of it. You're probably keeping track of what items go faster and what don't. You're probably keeping track of people's schedules. If you're a shift leader, you're probably trying to figure out who's going to be working and how long they're going to be working for. And so all of these are skills that you could put into these bullet points, but I'm not getting any of that from these 3 bullet points. So you got to beef it up a little bit more. And I'd actually say the same.
Oh,
Yep, go ahead.
Also, if in this role, being an inventory manager, I'm sure they must have trained someone or are supervising someone, if not multiple people. And so I know that y'all are always trying to level up. All of us are. These are the ways that you do it when you demonstrate management experience. So make sure to add that too. And I feel like when I talk through with students their jobs, they give me so much more than what's on the sheet of paper. So maybe also verbally just like saying it, writing it down on the piece of paper, and then, revising because you're getting to the meat of it. So any management experience, anytime you train, anytime you supervise, add it to your resume because that will set you up for a management role in the future.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And don't worry about making the bullet sound super fancy at first. That, you'll refine that as you kind of edit your resume. But as Gwen mentioned, like put everything down, everything that you've done, even if it's just to help kind of get your brain thinking, anything that you've done. I organized the chips, I locked up at night, I managed the employee that I was working with. Put all of that down, and then it's going to really help you say, okay, I can actually delete this, I can delete this. Let me rewrite this one a little bit. I can combine these. And then from there, you're going to see a nice, robust resume start to develop. So I would say the same thing about CVS. You see a big difference. I'd say a great enhancement from CVS to Wells Fargo. A little bit more robust, a little bit more thorough. But again, all of these are in the wrong order. So we're going to have to fix that. You want your most relevant up top to answer somebody else's question that they had asked before. And the other thing is you can see that they worked at Wells Fargo twice and subsequently. So they started out as the teller, and then you can tell they got promoted to the personal banker. And so I can tell that because I've analyzed this resume and looked at the dates and figured that out. But if a recruiter was scanning this, the timeline isn't there. And so you need to adjust that to tell that story a little bit better. Moving on to education. Again, lots of different fonts. You can't really tell what's going on here. Remove high school. And it's great that you have, College of Marin, but I would just kind of tweak that a little bit more to make it much more professional looking. Languages. I think it's always great to put languages, especially if you are bilingual, trilingual, whatever it might be, because you never know what the role might entail and if they need that skill or not. So I think it's great to put it there. One tip that I would have though is Google like best ways to showcase language on my resume. And you'll get lots of pictures that says, this is how you should do it, this is how you shouldn't do it. And so when I look at this one, speak, read, and write proficient, I would enhance it just a little bit. I would say, speaking, are you conversational? Are you proficient? Or are you fluent? You want to be very clear there. In reading and writing, again, are you proficient? Or are you fluent? Just be able to be a little bit more specific there. And then remove references upon references available upon request. That's a given. You'll give references no matter what. So save some space and go ahead and remove that. And so I know I gave a lot of tips on this. And so I wanted to share my screen really fast. And in 5 minutes, I did some edits just so you guys could see that version versus me taking, as I mentioned, just about 5 minutes and working on formatting. So give me 1 second, let me share my screen. Okay. So here, Gwen, can you see my screen? Just want to make sure you can see it. Yeah. Oh, you can't see it? Oh, here. Now? Okay, perfect. So everything that I mentioned, I did here, and I condensed it into 1 page. So hopefully you can see this is much more clean. You can tell the story. You can see the full name, hopefully, and the order in his jobs. And I'm just now realizing I may have, yeah, I forgot to do this. My mistake here. I was supposed to move Subway to the bottom. So let me do that really fast for you guys so you can see what this should really look like.
Just to add really quickly, I think it would also be great to get a major for College of Marin. Always add your major, y'all, so that, that way when you're applying to things, employers can see that your education is applicable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree with that. And so you can see all the tips that I gave of putting everything in the right order, having consistent formatting. It just, again, tells a different story. And so I took, let me see which one it was. I think it was Subway. So we moved Subway all the way down here. And so I tweaked a little bit of the bullets that they originally had there. And one of them I switched to manage the goods purchasing process and staying within budget of $240K per year. That's much more detail oriented than what we saw in the previous example. So it's just going in, tweaking and things like that. And I kept the skills in there, but I moved it to the bottom just to fill it out and make it look good. But other than that, hopefully you can see the difference between what he had originally had there and some of the tweaks that we just discussed.
Awesome, thank you. So I know we're getting pretty close to 6 o'clock and there's a lot of questions. I'm okay for time. Sogol, are you okay?
Yeah, I'm okay for time. And if we can't get to all, I can always respond to some via email.
Okay, so we'll go for about maybe 10 to 15 minutes more. Put in your questions now if you have questions. I see that we still have 43 folks on, so let's keep going. You guys are engaged and into this. Let's do it. Let's answer some of these questions. All right. We did cover key points to include in a cover letter, but we can reiterate. So do you want to take that one?
Sure. So key points that I would convey in a cover letter would be how your previous experiences relate to the new role that you are applying for. Say, I did XYZ in my previous role, which I think will help me do XYZ in this role based on what I see from the job description. Another point to kind of put in there is why you want to work for that specific company. It's not just you're applying for this role, but you're applying to work at the company. So I think that's a big thing to put in there as well. And again, if you're making a career shift, if you're making an industry shift, it's important to say why you are making that shift and why you want to, so that the recruiting managers can get a glimpse into your thought process there.
All right, great. Let's see. Would a programmed resume through a website such as Overleaf be preferred over Word? And I'll answer this, but I want to hear what Sokol has to say too. I would say it doesn't matter what you use as long as you save it as a PDF and the formatting looks good. Use anything, but save it to a PDF. Sokol, did you have anything else?
Agreed. I honestly, I think you said Overleaf. I'm not sure what Overleaf is. Yeah. So again, as long as the formatting's great and it's in PDF form, that's what we look for.
All right, great. If you are currently attending community college and have a lot of accomplishments in high school, should you list those in addition to your job experience? Great question.
That's a really good question. And I have seen a lot of resumes like that, and I think it's completely up to you. And if it's relevant to the job and how relevant it might be. If you really have a lot, maybe cut it down and maybe just do, 3 or 4. Or if 3 or 4 is your, max, then maybe cut it down to 2. But it's always good to show, it's good to showcase your eagerness and your work experience, however it is, if it's volunteer, if it's professional, or if it's, education related. So it's definitely a good thing to add. I just think it depends on the situation.
Great, thank you. I have another question about the objective section, which we discussed, but I'll just review really quickly. The objective section is a nice to have. It's not required. However, if you use the objective, again, I know I just said this, but I'll say it again, make sure that it's absolutely applicable to the role that you're applying for, and that it's not just some like broad objective and you're going to send this out to like 100 people. And I mean, I know that that's what happens. However, if you do a few different templates that are industry specific or role specific, I would recommend that, or just change it every time and just remember that you need to do that if you're going to use the objective section.
Completely agree.
All right, let's go through here. What about a professional summary paragraph instead of an objective? I've seen those too on resumes.
Yeah. I think it goes back to Gwen's point of it has to be relevant and it has to be written right. So it's very similar to a thank you note. So you have to make sure that it's pertinent to the job that you are interviewing for. But if you're gonna go into a paragraph, you might as well just convert it over to a cover letter, I think, in my opinion, because your resume is to showcase your work experience. And if you're doing it to kind of fluff the resume, that can be okay. I think it's a very fine line, but I think err on the safe side and just go towards cover letter at that point.
Wonderful, thank you. Next question is about including GPA in your resume. So what I have found with various different companies is that some of them want to see it, some of them don't care. So when it comes to what I found specifically, finance and tech, and very competitive companies, and you all know who I'm talking about, Facebook, Twitter, all of the biggies here in the Bay Area, some of them, it seems like a lot of them do look. What I recommend for students who feel compelled to put it on there, if it's over a 3.0, feel free to put it on there, but not all jobs need that. If it's under a 3.0, I don't know that you need to put it on there, right? Soho, what's your take on GPA on the resume and where should it be too? I think it should
Yeah.
be in the education section, but go ahead.
Yeah, it should be at the education section. It should be right up there, by your major, your graduation date. And honestly, we are a company that does care about GPA. So it's a relevant question. We do have a GPA minimum. And so I like seeing it on the resume because I can clearly say, like, okay, this person's qualified. Um, if not, but I like the resume, then I will reach out to that person and say, hey, can you provide your GPA? So I will go the extra step and ask that individual to provide that resume, or sorry, to provide that GPA. Others may not. It depends. You have to know the nuances of the companies that you are interviewing with. Like we mentioned, if it's a Facebook or a Twitter, or if it's a financial services firm, like test it out and see what works best. Again, yes, if it is less than a 3.0, don't put it on there, because that'll hurt more than it can help. But I've also had individuals that have had 4.0 resumes, 4.0 GPAs, and haven't put it on there either. And it's kind of an interesting social experiment. But if it's over 3.0, I would put it on there. It'll help, I would say.
Awesome, thank you. What about awards? So many of our students either win awards, or not only do they have our scholarship, they have numerous other scholarships. Are those sections that you recommend to have if you're applying for, a job? I do feel like it's important in other scenarios, but for job seeking specifically, do you recommend that they include that?
I think it is nice to have. Again, it depends on how full your resume is. If you're already close to 2 pages, don't put it on there. If it's your first job and you don't have much work experience, it's okay to put it on there. But if you already have, a few years of work experience, whether it's, working during college, or working, after college, um, I wouldn't say it's really necessary. It just depends. Does it feel like it's going to help, or does it feel like it's just taking space? And you'll have to make that judgment call. Um, but sometimes it really can be good to show. But I've seen resumes where a majority of it is awards, and they scrunched it all up to get it on there, but they still had a lot of work experience. And at that point, it's not really relevant. I'm more concerned about your work experience.
Excellent, thank you. All right, we just have a couple more questions and then we'll close tonight. But I love all of these questions and we still have 36 folks, so that's great. All right, Dulce, how do you make the skills portion sound less generic? How would you explain no previous work experience on the resume? So two different questions.
Um, Sorry, can you repeat those questions one more time?
Let's start with the first one. How do
Okay.
you make the skills portion sound less generic?
How do you make it sound less generic? So that can be hard, if you are putting generic skills on there, which that's kind of something that's really hard to avoid. And so I guess it depends on what skills you want to put on there. So in Carlos Santana's example, for example, some of the skills that he had were quick learner, multitask, and computer proficiency. So ways that I would enhance that are by saying, instead of saying multitask management, I would say ability to prioritize. Prioritize is a big buzzword. That's a great thing to say these days. Instead of saying computer proficiency, I would say proficiency in Microsoft Office, because I'm assuming that's what that means, is that he can work in Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel, Microsoft PowerPoint. So be a little bit more specific instead of just very generic like that. Although saying proficiency in Microsoft Office is pretty generic in and of itself, it's slightly more detailed than the previous examples.
All right, a couple more questions and
Yeah,
we're done.
sounds good.
Um, if we apply for a job but have not heard back from the employer or recruiter, is it appropriate to reach out to them on the status of our application?
Yeah, you absolutely can. And it's totally appropriate. You may or may not actually get a response. Um, and when I was going through the interview process, I would always get frustrated being like, oh, why haven't I heard back? Why haven't I heard back? And it's honestly just because we're going through so many resumes that we don't always have the capacity to reach out to everybody. So it's definitely fair to reach out and show your interest. And at that point, they can let you know, like, oh, sorry, we ended up going with another candidate. Or the honest truth sometimes of, we haven't even reviewed the resumes just yet. We'll get back to you, in a week. So it's okay to reach out, but don't be bummed if they don't respond.
It's it's a zoo out there, y'all.
Yeah.
Um, keep applying, keep going, track every job that you apply for on a sheet. And I know that's extra work and no one wants to do it, but it will help if you are tracking the date that it was posted, the date that you applied, and any other information. Do you have any contacts there, et cetera, et cetera? Always keep the job description in case they take that job down. But just keep going. The Bay Area is extremely competitive. It's a pandemic. It's wild out there. Don't take it personally. Keep applying. Okay.
Absolutely. Keep applying. Those are amazing tips, because we have, set interviews up with individuals, and we have a call set for next week comes, I give them a call, and they've applied to so many jobs that they didn't realize that I was the recruiter for another company, and they kept referencing XYZ company instead of my company. And it's heartbreaking on the phone. And it's just like, if you had that spreadsheet and you had my name right next to the company, you would save yourself a lot of embarrassment that way.
Yes, on that note, you track any activity or contact as well on the sheet that you've received from, even if it's just like, okay, I got the confirmation that I applied, put that on there so that you can really see the timeline. And also,
Mhm.
as far as timeline, y'all, it can vary for company and it takes a long time to make an offer. So keep that in mind too. Um, one question that we received is, should we provide contact information for each employer? So my answer is that you don't need to do that. Not on your resume. That takes up way too much space. And it's not necessary. I've never had, a recruiter ask me for that. What they will ask you for are references. So then you provide, supervisor's name and email and phone number is really all a recruiter will need or a hiring manager will need. But you don't need to provide any other contact information for the employer. And then our last question, when you apply for your job, so I think that this is just, it could be any job, but when you apply for a job, do you qualify for all of the qualifications for the job, or were you missing some qualities? And so I think I understand what you're saying here, because a lot of students ask me this. I found this amazing internship or job. I want to go for it. I have almost all the qualifications, but there are some that I don't have. I feel like I shouldn't apply. So my advice is always, you know, they're looking for someone that has some of these. Some of these might be trainable. Every company has a different situation. Apply anyway. Sogol, anything to add
Yeah,
on?
absolutely. Apply anyway. You never know how many people they've gone through. You never know whether they're focusing more on those qualifications or if they're focusing more on a culture fit. It's not going to hurt to apply, and don't put yourself down just because you might not qualify or you might not hit every single one of those bullets. All of those bullets are always stretches, and even some companies say, if you don't qualify, if you don't match all of these, then don't apply. I'd still apply. You really never know. It depends on who you get and what stage they're in their process. If you don't qualify for any of them, you still feel free to apply, but know that it's going to be a little bit harder. But hopefully you then know maybe what you need to do to start qualifying for positions like that so that you can tailor some of your experience and try to get it as an internship or as a volunteer opportunity. Try to gain that experience so that you can put that on your resume so that you can start qualifying for those.
Yes, just keep applying. And I appreciate what you said about, you know, the complete qualifications is a stretch. That's like the dream employee.
Mhm.
So keep that in mind. And Dulce, I'm so sorry, we forgot your second question. So I want to answer that and then we'll close. How do you explain no previous work experience on a resume? So we've covered this a little bit, but I just want to reiterate. Are there any organizations that you're a part of? You know, even at your college, clubs, organizations, even if you're a part of, you know, sports, anything demonstrating your commitment, longevity, if there's any leadership roles that you've had in a club or on a team, volunteer work, which Sobel mentioned. Are there any cool workshops? I mean, we're in a webinar right now, like there's webinars everywhere. Are there any cool webinars that you have attended that are pertinent to the role? Any of those things I would absolutely suggest. Anything else?
Absolutely. I would say, say that in your cover letter, mention all of that stuff, explain why. I mean, explain the elephant of the room of, why there's no work experience there. And as long as you have a compelling reason and are articulating it correctly, hopefully somebody's going to give you that chance to interview. And once you interview, we could do a whole nother workshop on interviewing skills. I won't dive into that, but once you're in the door, that's a different story.
This concludes our resume refresh webinar. I am so happy that we had Sogol join us. It was so nice to have another person talking about all of these topics with our students. I know that y'all get tired of hearing it from me, but hopefully you learned something. Hopefully there is something tonight that you can apply to your resume like tomorrow. Even if you feel like you were done with your resume, remember it's a living, breathing document that you're going to have to continue to edit until you're retired. That sounds dramatic, but it's true. And every time you do something really cool at school, you want to add that to your resume and you'll continue to do so. So I will be following up with all of you that have attended, even some of the people that have dropped off. I'll send you all some electronic resources, templates, websites, more resume tips, etc. We're also recording this, so this will be available on our YouTube channel. And I appreciate your time and energy. There's so many webinars happening. Thank you for tuning in tonight. And work on your resume. It's already internship season. Be ready to apply. And with that, good night, everyone. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, guys. Good luck.